Hi, and thank you for listening to the Curate Church podcast. If you haven't already heard, Curate is launching in Auckland. If you live in Auckland and you don't have a church to call home, we would love to see you at our next Curate Auckland Interest Gathering on the 16th of June at Mission Bar and Eatery in Mission Bay. Come along and meet the team, make some friends, and hear the story. Maybe you know someone that needs to be there. Help us spread the word and let them know. Follow us on Instagram at curate_Auckland or jump onto our website for more details. We're moving into the neighbourhood and we hope to see you there. Here's the latest message from Curate.
Hey, a few years ago, 7 years ago, almost to the day, where our church was meeting in the Bay Park Speedway Stadium Lounge. Would like to say those were the days, but those were the crappy days. Man, they've done that venue up recently, no offense to the people here that work there, but it's still pretty crappy. So, but it was way worse then. And on Sunday mornings, as we would hire the stadium lounge, we'd turn up after whatever event had been the night before, and the place would stink of sausage rolls, Jack Daniels, the clay from the speedway track, and rubbish, really. That was like the concoction. You'd open the doors, that's what you'd be greeted with. If people were pregnant and they came to church, well, morning sickness and that venue, they didn't go together very, very well. In fact, we didn't have time to fully dress the venue before the service each morning, so it would still have big Jack Daniels posters everywhere. It'd be like Jack Daniels, like lyrics for worship, Jack Daniels, because they sponsored the lounge. It was an alcoholic's nightmare too, and they wouldn't let us use the main entrance to the venue because we're just a church, so we had to use the back entrance, which the only way you could get there was by walking past the skip bins. They were right outside the main door, and they were always overflowing with just beautiful odors and sights from the night before. So that was it's like there wasn't a welcome team, the bin was your welcome team. It's like, great to have you here at church. And so, best to say the church shrunk in that venue. It didn't grow, and it was about 50 or 60 people back then, and we knew that if God was going to do something, we actually needed to find a better venue. It was hard to find a good temporary venue in our city. There's not many good ones, and so that allow for kids' church and different things. But we spied out a closed down bar just down the road. It had been closed for a year since somebody got murdered in the toilets with a screwdriver. And so the business had shut down, and we were looking for a place to lease, and it was the perfect venue because it had the right consents, and because it had the stigma, it was sort of cheap. And so we got about 15 different leaders in our church. We walked through the building. We prayed about whether or not this was the right one, because we didn't have the finances for a building. We didn't have the ability. We were in debt. We're sort of like, the church was very small. We couldn't even afford a venue like that, but we knew that we needed to take a step of faith. So as we walked through, we prayed, and I think there was more or less a consensus that was the right thing to do. We went from sausage rolls and Jack Daniels to, when we opened the doors to this building, it had the 1 year closed up alcohol carpet must. It had the sign like no smoking in the toilets, as if smoking in the auditorium was fine. And it was just great. So we felt like it was God. We talked to the landlord this time 7 years ago, and we said, we'd love to lease the building. We didn't tell him that we couldn't afford it, so we asked for a 3-month rent holiday. So it's like, you would give us the keys today, but would make our first payment in 3 months' time. Are you all good with that? He said, yeah, that's fine. I didn't tell him the reason we weren't going to pay him was because we didn't have any money, but, he said yes, and he was very kind to us. And so we moved in, and the very first week we moved in, it wasn't flash, there was no frills, but God was there. And the church began to grow. I mean, there were no frills. Like, the screen was held up with like ratchet ties that you hold things down with. There was the projector screen was right behind the worship leader on a tiny little wooden table, like pointing straight up. There was no stage. There was still the old like chiller from where they have the fridge and you have all the pre-mixed drinks. Well, like that, the fridge was gone, but the hole in the chiller was still there. That was right next to the stage. We didn't have, it was like bright, ugly colors. It had a fireplace, which was sort of cool. That was about the only thing going for it. We left the no smoking and the toilet sign up to the day we left, because we thought it had a bit of character. We'll leave something of the old there. But I tell you, over those 3 months, we're waiting on a financial miracle. Every single week I thought, man, the church is growing. The church almost doubled in those 3 months that we moved into that building. God was up to something. His presence was there. People's lives were being changed. People were finding community. And I was thinking, man, they're going to start giving. So we're going to be able to afford this. This is no problem. Until the 8-week mark where the finances were still the same. And then the 9-week mark, the 10-week mark, the 12-week mark, nothing had changed. The payment is due the following week. It's the Sunday before the payment's due. And we're at the last service. I'm thinking, God, where are you? Where is this financial miracle we've been praying for? We felt like you led us here. You've obviously been working here, but where's the financial provision? The people who had their houses signed on the form as guarantors, they were starting to get a bit nervous. And so we're just thinking the service was winding down. It was getting almost to the end. People were cleaning up. We were locking the doors. And someone came and talked to me in the car park. And they said, how are you paying for this? And I said, I don't know. I hope you're the answer. They said, well, I'm not the answer, but I have been thinking about it, and I've been talking with a friend who is a chairman in another organization, and I've talked to him about the potential for them paying for your rent, and how much is it? Because they're willing to give $50,000 this year to the lease. I said, well, wouldn't you know, the lease is $50,000. That week, they actually began to make a 2-monthly payment to us that would see all of the lease paid for that entire year. Don't you love it when God comes through? That's right. He deserves a lot of praise. Financial miracles are great miracles. Second only to healing, they've got to be the best kind. You know, when you're in a tight spot where you need something and God comes through, they're just amazing. It's amazing to be on the receiving end of financial miracles. Katie and I and this church have been in so many different situations where we've been on the receiving end of financial miracles. But as I've grown over the years, I've began to think about how in my life, I don't just want to be on the receiving end of financial miracles. I want to be on the provision end of financial miracles. And I started to think about the person and the type of organization that they ran, that they would be in such a financial position that they would be able to give to a church that they don't know about, not even being Christians. What do they know about money that would lead them to be able to have the resources to give in a time like that? And I started to think, whatever they had and whatever they knew, imagine if every Jesus follower had and knew that. We wouldn't just be people that need financial miracles. We could be people who are financial miracles to the people around us. And I want to invite you into a way of life tonight that doesn't just rely on God to rescue us because we live unwisely with finances. Yes, I believe in taking risks, and I believe in leaning on God and believing Him for breakthrough and provision. I believe in taking crazy steps of faith, even though the money isn't in the account yet to do it. And we should be those people. But I also believe in applying wisdom's principles to our finances so that we're not always relying on a miracle to just get through each month. Because God actually has things to teach us that would allow us to build wealth over time through wisdom's ways. And that's what this whole series has been about uncovering these principles. Listen to what it says in Proverbs 8 verse 17. It says, and this is like wisdom speaking to you. It says, I love all who love me, wisdom says. Those who search will surely find me. It's good news for people looking for wisdom. I have riches and honor, wisdom says, as well as enduring wealth and justice. My gifts are better than gold, even the purest gold. My wages are better than silver. I walk in righteousness, in paths of justice. Those who love me, wisdom says, will inherit wealth, and I will fill their treasuries. I will fill their bank accounts. I will fill their assets. See, there is something that we need to learn in our Christian faith, and it's about, learning to walk in faith and relying on God, but it's also learning to walk in wisdom and apply wisdom's principles when it comes to our finances. And if we could be people who believe for great breakthrough and believe God could do anything, but also treat our finances with prudence and diligence, applying principles, we will set up our lives for amazing financial breakthrough. Where not only will we see God do great things in our lives, we will position our lives so God can do great things through our lives into other people's lives. And that's what I want for us as a church. See, we've been, part of the hard part where people struggle to understand God's financial principles, I think, is because they were written in the scripture in a very different time. You know, these days, it's a monetary society, and most people earn their money through wages or salaries. You are paid either weekly, you're paid fortnightly, or you're paid monthly for most people. You're paid based on the hours that you put in, and that's how your role and your money system works. When most of the Bible was written, it was written into agricultural societies where people didn't so much rely on money, and they understood the world in a very different way, and they understood their earnings in a very different way. Their earnings had more to do with how much their land yielded than it did have to do with how many hours they put in directly. They weren't necessarily paid wages. They were actually farmed their own plots of land, and what came from that ground is what they earn. And so God is speaking his principles, and I think if we could get our mindset into a sort of farming mindset, we would help to understand his principles, so then we can take them to our monetary world and figure out how they apply. So, to illustrate, I've got my last year's harvest from my farm. I've got all my seeds here. We had a pretty good year. There's bazillions of them in here. I don't even know what type of seeds they are. That's how much farming blood I have. But if you could imagine for a moment, if the way that Katie and I earned a living was through our farm, we would get to harvest time where all of the crop would be cut down, and all of the crops would then be bundled up, and then they would all be threshed, and all of the seeds or whatever type of crop it was would come out of that crop, and then those seeds would fall out of all the kernels and the different things, and they would be collected up, and what was left at the end would be our harvest. It would be the end of the season. It would be the end of summer, just before autumn, and we would have our harvest. And we would have to look at this harvest and think, man, thank you, God, for all of this, but what are we going to do with this so that we can live for the next year and there can be some more harvest? I know this is hard to understand if we just earn a wage, but this is the context that the Bible was spoken into, and so we've earned our money. And if you've earned your money through farming, you probably realize that there were a lot of factors that you didn't have control of that needed to work in your favor for you to have a bountiful harvest. All the people that know anything about kiwi fruit are sort of nodding, you know, because it applies, because you realize that for you to earn this, man, a lot could have gone wrong and meant that you didn't have this. Man, you could have had a frost at the wrong time. Man, you could have had an invasion of a certain type of pest or infection or a virus in your plants. You could have had a hailstorm right when the fruit was ripening, and you would have ended up with nothing. Man, a fire could have come through and wiped out all of your crop. Like, there's a lot that could have gone wrong, but this year it went right. And because it went right, man, it's easy to see why people would tithe. Because it's sort of like, God, you've given me the ability to have this. It's sort of like, if your favor was not on my farm, I wouldn't have anything. But because your favor's been on my farm, man, of course I'm going to honor you through the tithe. I'm going to return to you the first tenth that you said was yours. The Bible never says to give the tithe. It always says to bring the tithe, because it's not yours. You can't give something that's not yours. That's why it says to bring it. He says the first tenth is mine. And he says it's like, recognize that all of this came from me. So return to me the first and the best of it as your statement of recognition that you couldn't have done this on your own. Now I know you're thinking, yeah, but those are the old days. Now I got a job. I got my degree. If God took his hand off your life, you would cease to breathe. Every bit of gift that you have, I don't think you can take credit for it, because you're sort of born with them. You might have worked it a little bit, developed it a little bit, but even the skills and the gift, maybe you earn money because you're strong. It's like God gave you that DNA so that you could end up that way. It's like whether it's your mind or your body, your creativity, even the people you know, isn't it probably God? Isn't God allowed you to be born and here and live here? Like, I mean, you could have been anywhere. You could have been in Bangladesh. You wouldn't have had this in Bangladesh. Right, like that's the reality. So that you've got to sort of take a step back and go, hold on a minute, most of the most significant things that have led to my life's success have nothing to do with me. I didn't choose my family. I didn't choose where I was born. And all of that is why I have the privilege of being who I am today. So, God, there's a lot of factors that were out of my control and I could have ended up anywhere, but here's what I have, so of course I would honor you with the first tenth. This is a principle we need to get before we get any of the others. But last week we began to talk about giving, because giving applies to the same law of sowing and reaping. See, God says, I will not be mocked. I've set a principle in this world. It's unchanging. You can't break it. It's a rule I've set up. What a man sows, that he will reap. Man, if you sow negativity, don't expect to reap positivity. If you sow discouragement, don't expect to reap encouragement. If you sow assuming the worst of everybody, don't expect to reap everybody assuming the best of you. If you sow stinginess, don't expect to reap generosity. Because God will not be mocked. This is the way the world works. That what a man sows, what a woman sows, that they will reap. And so God begins to say that our finances are things that can be sown. And if you read 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, the Apostle Paul says that, in fact, if we would take our seed and we would sow it into needs, then what God promises is that there would always be enough seed for us and enough seed for the needs. See, if we would become generous people to the needs in this world, God's promise is that you will never go without if you become someone God can use to get resources where He needs it to go. And this is the second principle we need to understand, because if we don't understand it, we will not be people who God wants to pour more into. Because God has all of the resources and God knows all of the needs, and He's looking for people like you and me that He can trust to be conduits in the middle. And you might go, well, I don't have a lot. That's all right. God loves to start with little bits. He loves to just test. He loves to just start with $5 and $10 and go, can I trust that you'd get that where I need it to go? Well, that's not even going to make a difference. That's not the point. The point is are you someone He can get stuff through, or are you like a blockade in your life? And if we would become people who can get stuff through, I think He increases the supply, the more He can trust that the supply will increase on the other side of our lives. And so if we want to enter truly blessed lives where we will have all sufficiency for every need, we need to become people who are generous. People who are generous. He says that when we sow these seeds of generosity, they reap harvests in the kingdom, but they also reap harvests in our lives. You know, every time we give, if you ever see anything significant happening in this world where somebody's life's getting changed, I promise you there was financial seeds that got sown. If there's a missionary reaching people for Jesus overseas, it was made possible because of financial seeds that got sown. If there's a church flourishing in its community, it was made possible because of financial seeds. If there's somebody that's being helped through addiction and different things like that, and they're finding a holistic health through it, hopefully finding God through it, I promise you that's a fruit, but that's a harvest, but it was made possible because of the seeds that somebody has enabled for that to happen. And God says, everything in my kingdom, all of the harvest of souls is always released through financial seeds. It's also, every time we sow these seeds, we actually invite God to increase our harvest in our own lives so that we can sow more seeds. Although Katie and I, this was sort of like our financial principles for most of our married life up until this point, and we tithed and honored God with the first 10% of all of our increases. When we got paid, when we got gifts, when we got different things, we honored God with the first 10% of that by giving it to His local church, bringing it to His local church, and we gave, and then we spent. But nobody really taught me about this one and the power of it. And so after, we've almost been married for 14 years, so after 14 years of earning and having amazing financial breakthroughs and different stories, we A few years ago, we found ourselves essentially not having a dollar to our name other than our home and the massive mortgage on it. And we realized this because we had become such generous people. And I'm not saying that to like blow our own trumpet, but we become generous, but we'd become so generous that we just continued to give ourselves poor. And so every time there was an offering at church, we would lead the way because we want to be in the top 10 givers in the church. And so we'd lead the way and empty our bank accounts. And every time we were at an event and there's an opportunity to help someone or support someone, we already went with our heart to be generous. And so we emptied out what we had to that need. And when there were people in the church that needed things and we knew they were going through a hard time, we emptied our bank accounts and did what we could for them in our own little way. And we did it year after year after year, but we gave ourselves poor. And it's really the principles in this book, and what I love about this is that we need to have a balanced perspective of our finances if we want our future to look any different than our today. And so what this book talks about, and what one of the principles I so believe in, is that whatever we give, we need to become people who save, and we always match our giving with our saving so that we don't give ourselves poor, but we also don't save ourselves stingy. Because I don't want to be so generous that I have nothing to pass on to my children. And I don't want to be so generous that I don't have the ability to be any more generous in 10 years' time because I just keep giving everything away and the only means of my generosity is if I earn more tomorrow. I want to have a better financial plan than that, but I also don't want to be so focused on having more tomorrow that I become so stingy today with the needs that are right in front of me. Look, people have been asking this week, we're having a good discussion in our group, what should I do with this? What should I do with my giving money? That's a very good question. Because I think God has principles that He would teach us about this. I just have some simple things. The first thing is this, is that we should consider the kingdom above all else with this money. Because other people, other philanthropists in our world will give to many things, but they'll never give to kingdom things. God's plan to finance the kingdom is Christians. And if Christians will not give to Christian things, who will? And so Christian things above all else should take our priority as we look through the lens. Because we can feed somebody through one organization, but we could feed the exact same person through another organization and give them the gospel. That's why I love sponsoring children, because it's a holistic perspective. When children are sponsored, they get taught the scriptures, they get educated, they get healthcare, their families get supported. It's a holistic perspective of feeding them and helping them and giving them a better future. So we need to consider the kingdom. But 3 things we should consider, I think we should do with our giving money. We should, we talked last week, if everybody tithed, we wouldn't have to have church offerings, so we'll see how that goes. I think we should consider the kingdom above all else. I think we should acknowledge our global responsibility. Our nation's one of the richest nations in the world. I know you don't always feel rich, but move to Bangladesh, you'll feel rich real quick. So we have a global responsibility to do something in the third world, to do things overseas. We need to take our global responsibility with our giving money. We need to take our local responsibility. God put you here for a reason. He put you here because He wants you to make a difference in this community. There's many great local organizations, local things making a massive difference. We should give towards those. So we should have a global, a local, but we should also have a relational perspective of this money. We should keep some of it aside to help the people that God brings past our path. So all of our generosity isn't just about money disappearing and I've done my good bit, but it's about me drawing near to people who need my life. And so that's just a little perspective there. So, principle, 10%, 10%, 10%. It's not so much, this percentage you can't really argue with because God determined it. These ones you won't find in the Bible. I'm talking about principles. But a great place to start, and I know many people in this room could actually start here because it's not like you're on one salary and got a young family. You're probably a single salary or double salary with not a huge amount of expenses. A lot of people here. So you honor God with the 10th, and then whatever you're going to do with these 2 things, you're going to keep them the same, and then you're going to spend what's left over at the end. This is how we begin to lock in these principles so they can bear fruit in our lives. So 10, and you might be thinking, 10, 10, all right? 70. Good? You'd be like, I can't afford that. Okay, 10, 5, 5, 80. I can't afford that. Okay. 10, 2, 2, 86. Like the point is, I know I'm good at maths. The point is, if we lock them together, we have a balanced perspective of our finances, where we are generous people and God will increase our harvest because we're people who can move resources to where God wants them to be. But we're also building a financial future for ourselves, our children, and our children's children, so that there is more in the future to make a difference with and to live off, so that tomorrow looks different to today. Here is the power of saving. Imagine this scenario. You're 15 years old and you save $10,000 and you invest, or $5,000, and you invest it. And then you do that for 10 years to the age of 24. So for the 10 years of your life, you put aside $5,000 a year, $100 a week, and you invest it. I wonder how much you think you're going to have at 65. You never save another dime in your life. But imagine the other person who at 25 finally realizes the principle of saving and starts putting aside $5,000 a year. But let's say they did it for 40 years of their life, not just 10 years. They did it all the way until they're 65. 40 years of $5,000 or 10 years of $5,000. The only difference is one person started 10 years earlier. I wonder who you think has more. See, the person who did it for 40 years, start at 25, they'll have $2.6 million. No, so they'll have $1.5 million. And the person, I just ruined the whole punchline. And the person who started, the person who did it just for 10 years will have $2.6 million. The difference between when you started saving later in your life ends up being $1.1 million, and that person never had to do any saving after the age of 24. This is the power of what I'm talking about for your financial future. If you did that between the age of 15 and 24, you would never have to put money in KiwiSaver ever, because you've got more than enough for your retirement. $2.6 million is enough money in retirement to never have to draw off the principal to have a great retirement if you've paid off your home. Which means that's $2.6 million that would eventually be an inheritance to your children or your children's children. And this is what we need to get. If we can get that saving is important, that investing is important in the church, that we don't want to give ourselves poor, we don't want to save ourselves stingy, we want to do both, we will have a great financial future. And the earlier you start, the better the future. Just a couple of little things. Just a couple. Do not save what is left after spending. Spend what is left after saving. You have to understand the difference. Do not save what is left after spending. Spend what is left after saving. Lock in the 10, the 10, the 10, or whatever it is you can do, and then find a way to live on that. Proverbs 21:20 says, "The wise have wealth and luxury, but fools spend whatever they want, whatever they get." I'm not talking about saving for a holiday. Let's just clarify that, all right? Saving for a trip to Bali. I'm not talking about saving for a new phone or saving for a car. I'm talking about saving for non-depreciating things. Saving to invest in a business. Saving to buy a home. Saving to pay off the mortgage. Saving to put into KiwiSaver or something like that. So here's a few things if you want to actually begin to live this life, some mindset changes you're going to need. First is you're going to need to get realistic expectations of your life, not Instagram expectations of your life. One of the greatest tyrannies of Instagram is the expectation of the type of luxury that everybody should live, that everybody appears to be living, that influencers appear to be living, that you're not living, and so you waste resources on things because you have unrealistic expectations. It gets us all. We need to have in our realistic expectations a balance between relying on God for financial breakthrough, but actually doing the hard yards of saying no to things and getting through this so that we can build a wisdom of ourselves and a resource of ourselves. See, God is a good father, so he'll bail out his kids when they're in trouble. But if they keep going to him and needing bailing out through their lack of wisdom, he's also a good father, and he'll probably stop bailing you out so that you can learn his principles that he has laid down in the scriptures for you. We need realistic expectations. We need to be willing to work hard over the long term. Somebody said to me many years ago, would you respect your dreams enough to pay the full price for them? Many of us talk a good dream game, but we don't talk a good sacrifice game. We've got the dream as long as it comes easy and comes quickly. But man, if you respect your dream enough, be willing to work for it for 20 years. Be willing to work for it for a decade. Be willing to go through the hard seasons of it to see it come about. Proverbs 21:5 says, good planning and hard work lead to prosperity, but hasty shortcuts lead to poverty. The reality is if you want to build some of this life, it might require working harder to get that breakthrough. It might require a season of going, actually, I need to get a second job. I need to work for another 10 hours because then I can get rid of that stupid debt I have and deal with that sort of thing so I can actually begin to get in these principles. It might not be a forever season, but you might have to work 60 hours for a while. That's okay. I know it's not normal in Mount Maunganui, but it's okay. You're not going to die. You got like 160 of them a week. You still got 100 to spare. Right? Like we can do this, like to get the financial breakthrough. Many of you are in seasons of your life where you're never going to have as much time and as much opportunity as you have now. And the earlier you start living by these principles, the more fruit they have a chance to bear in the future. Third thing, I hate this one. We have to learn to say no. Somebody knows me. Come on, it's the hardest part, but if we don't say no to things, our yes is meaningless. Because our yes only gets context by our no's. If everything's a yes, then nothing's really a yes. It just is. We need to have no's to amplify our yeses. Maybe you struggle with discipline and different things. I reckon the biggest lie of the enemy over people's lives is to trick them that they're bad with finances. You're not bad with finances. You just never tried to be good. You never tried to actually be accountable. You never set out the spreadsheet. You never set out the accounts so that they would win. One of the best books is the book, The Barefoot Investor, to set up your accounts and your different things to understand financial principles to help you say no to things. You can set up systems to say no. You know that now you can contribute 10% to KiwiSaver. You can choose that, whether you're self-employed or employed. So you can just tick that, and then that's your savings thing done. And so whatever turns up in your account, you can figure out how to do these two things with it. But that part's already been done, and then live off the rest. So if you really struggle, but you're serious, set up a system that sets you up to win. I love this. Rich people stay rich by living like they're broke. But broke people stay broke by living like they're rich. Many of the things that we say are symbols of wealth are actually the symbols of the absence of wealth because the wealth has been spent. Nothing wrong with having a nice car, but we look at somebody with a nice car and think, man, they must be rich. Well, maybe they were before they spent it on the car, but now they're poor because they no longer have that wealth. It's in a depreciating asset. It's becoming worth less every single day. We just got to understand our mindsets around these things. Like what I want for us more than anything is I just want us to enter God's principles so that tomorrow would be better than today. Look, we've come through a time with incredible economic growth and good times in the world and lots of opportunities, living in a heyday of sorts. Tough times will come. It's inevitable. It's the seasons of the world. Times where to get a good job and to get a pay rise won't come as easy. Do you know if you live this sort of life, you're not going to be a person who worries in those seasons because you've actually put stuff aside? Yeah, it might be stressful, but it's not going to be as stressful. Things might be tight, but it's not going to be as hard because you're not running from zero. You've been wise. You've been generous. You've been honoring God, so you know He's going to take care of you. You know that there's a harvest coming your way. And then you know you got some reserves there to lean on in hard times.